Welcome to another episode of the Boring AppSec podcast. Today, we're chatting with Dennison, the co-founder and CTO of Semgrep. Anshuman and I are both fans of Semgrep, and you will notice us being absolute fanboys on the episode as well. We had a great time chatting with Drew about how Semgrep started, why Drew and his co-founders decided to open source Semgrep, and much, much more. Listen in.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. We really appreciate it, and it's great to have you on the show. So,
thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. How about we get started? If there's anything you would like to share about Semgrep as a company or anything before we start getting into some of the questions that we have. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for talking a little bit about custom rules. So Semgrep is a software company here. We're a startup based out of San Francisco. We build a product called Semgrep, and Semgrep's a code security tool. It's more than that, but that's our primary use case right now. So obviously this is an AppSec podcast. So I assume most listeners are familiar with static application, testing, where we look for bugs, code that software is being written. And there's many tools. Semgrep's an open source primarily tool, and then we've got a commercial product that has more capabilities, has better performance, and also has a whole bunch of integrations and things too. So if you don't want to host it all yourself, check out our website. And our core kind of focus is custom rules. We think there's a lot of value in these security tools that have a bunch of out-of-the-box rules. Semgrep has several thousand rules that have been written by our security research team, as well as the community of experts that have contributed their open source rules. But every company is different, right? And you're going to have vulnerability that's happened. Maybe you had a pen test, you found something. Maybe there's just a specific way you want to do security at your company. Well, great. Let's codify that into a Semgrep rule, make it really easy to write, and now you have this control, right? They could either bring in the human expert, from the security team to help provide, more human judgment. And it's kind of this alerting tool, or it can actually prevent or block, if there's just a policy. It's like, hey, we don't want any MD5 in our code anymore. It's 2025. Let's not mess with that. You can just prevent that, right? And that means that, any developer maybe who isn't keeping up with the latest, in security or corporate policies, right? It really lets you scale your security team through automation. So happy to talk more about that. I know it's a lot, but that's kind of what our focus is on, and helping secure the world's software.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I actually want to start with your experience as an entrepreneur in residence when you were at Red Point Ventures. What was your experience like, and how did you meet your co-founders? How did this idea of starting Semgrep came about? If there's anything you can share about your learnings, things that went well, things that didn't go well, that would be awesome.
Sure, absolutely. So I met my co-founders back in undergrad. We all went to MIT and studied computer science. Our CEO, Isaac, was my roommate, and Luke, third co-founder, he was lived next door. So very good friends. We knew each other for a long time. We kind of gone our separate ways. I worked at Palantir. But we kind of always stayed in touch. And then this opportunity came to go work at Red Point. It honestly sounded a little bit like a scam, too good to be true, especially to Isaac, our CEO. He'd been working at the government, and you have to pay for coffee there, right? So the idea of like, hey, come work out of the venture capital office, eat our free lunch, incubate ideas. It seemed too good to be true, but we were really grateful for the opportunity. It was almost like a scene out of Silicon Valley, the TV show. If you watch that, like there's this windowless closet, no amenities, just kind of, fluorescent lights. And we just sat and we kind of hacked all day. We always knew we wanted to do something in the space that was security and engineering, and how could we bring more of an engineering mindset to security? Because, a lot of security is traditionally more like an IT field, right? Firewalls, antivirus scanners and whatnot. And so we played around with 6 or 7 different ideas, talked to a bunch of people. I also got a chance to sit in and listen to other entrepreneurs pitch the venture capitalists, which was just super valuable experience to kind of understand, what the venture capitalists were looking for or not. It made a good pitch, but didn't. So I was really grateful for that. And, we had no idea what we were really doing. I think, we joke as founders, like we were so focused on building this really cool tech and writing demos, and we were just so excited to write software, which wasn't bad, but we kind of missed the opportunity to go ask people like, hey, what are your real problems? And so we built something really cool. We'd lead with the technology. We'd be like, will you buy it? And people were like, oh, it's pretty interesting. Like, we're not really interested right now, but like, stay in touch. And we took that as validation. And in hindsight, it's like, no, we should have gone and been like, what are your top 3 problems? Taken notes, and then figured out how we could potentially address it. So a lot of learnings, but that was about 9 months of just kind of every day living and breathing. Like, what were new ideas? And we had all kinds of crazy ideas, like building a firewall for databases, right? And quickly, threw that idea out. But it was just like, it was kind of fun, and I missed those early days of working with a small team and thinking about.
Yeah. I remember back in the days when we used to do static analysis for our customers and clients. Both Sandesh and I, we worked for security consulting companies, Digital, where we used to often do these sort of scanning static dynamic for clients, and we used to use tools like IBM Rational, AppSec Source, and then Fortify. And still remember, those were such heavy tools to deploy, to implement, to get used to it. And I also remember our clients wouldn't be comfortable sharing their code bases with us, right? So we used to remotely VPN into the systems, use Spotify. It was a very bad user experience, to be honest. And then when Semgrep came in the scene, I'm like, what is this? Like, how is it so easy to just kind of create your own custom rules and find vulnerabilities? That seems to be too good to be true, right? But then, yeah, I started playing with it, and I'm like, this is valuable, right? Like, even though, I mean, with the first versions of Semgrep, right, I think it just allowed us to scan one single file. There was no inter-file analysis. But that was still valuable, right? Like, there were like functions and authorization decorators which would go on API endpoints. Finding those vulnerabilities became so much easier using Semgrep. So, yeah, so like I said, I'm a big fan of it, and I continue to be a big fan of it.
Oh, well, thank you for the feedback. You're totally right. Actually, my very first intern back in college, they gave me the task to go deploy Fortify, which was really fun. I got to go figure out how to get a server, install this war file. It was an old like Apache Tomcat server. It was quite tricky to set up. It took me most of the summer to get it all set up and configured, and then I'm not even sure that the team was really able to use it. They certainly weren't sending any results to developers, right? And I think this is a kind of our whole approach here, which is like, you can go do perfect static analysis, try to find every single bug, do this really expensive, complex, deep analysis, which certainly is valuable, but 90% of your bugs, it's like, oh, I forgot to set the authentication required decorator. It's not really like a novel vulnerability, right? It's like the OWASP top 10, it's SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Like, we know how to prevent these. It's just developers make mistakes, and some languages and frameworks are more secure by default than others. But we figured if we could just make it really easy to write. I know the inspiration was kind of, we're sitting at a bar together and you're complaining, you're like, oh, I just found a security vulnerability. Someone did this, they forgot to set the initialization vector or whatever. Like, how would we sketch that on a napkin? And then like as close to that as possible can we make that the Semgrep rule? And now we're trying to go even a step further. I mean, I'm sure talk more about this later, but using generative AI to say like, well, let's not force people are busy to learn our language, even as simple as it is. Maybe you can just give us an English description of what you're trying to find and a couple examples, maybe examples of things you're trying to match, things you're not trying to match. And let's see if we can come up with a rule that's either correct or 90% of the way there. And then you can, have that as a starting point. So a lot of work to do, but, I'm glad to know that our kind of core hypothesis of like letting developers and security engineers customize things continues to resonate.
Yeah. I still have PTSD from doing a consulting engagement of 3 months of custom rule writing in Fortify with that weird XML editor thing, which honestly, it was super cool that you could do it. But if you think about how much simpler it is these days, that definitely felt like a different era, right? So another thing, so custom rules is one thing that we all love about Semgrep. The other one, which was kind of interesting when at least Semgrep came out, was how good the open source versions were. When I started playing with Semgrep as well, I played with the open source version as well before we kind of use the commercial version for a company has to work at. Having said that, I know so many companies today whose entire SaaS program is actually built off the open source version of Semgrep. They don't even go commercial, right? Now, as an entrepreneur myself, I have questions around why would you do that kind of a thing. But as an AppSec, if I put my AppSec professional hat, I kind of feel like it's kind of help. I know it's an overused word, but like sort of democratize SaaS and make sure that everybody can at least get started and start using it, right? So just walk us through kind of your thought process on why you have like a powerful open source version which is available with very, very liberal licensing. And what does it mean from a technology user adoption perspective, and what does it mean from like a business perspective to maintain such a strong open source presence?
Yeah, so there's really three main reasons. I'll walk through those. One, Semgrep is technology that we've built a lot over the last 4 years or so, but with building on about a decade of development that happened at Facebook. So the creator of Semgrep, this guy Johan, who now works for us, he was an early engineer at Facebook and built a lot of the concepts of really easy to write rules there. Now, it only supported a few languages. It didn't have all the pattern syntax. There's a lot that's changed. It's almost unrecognizable, but of course, building on the foundations there of an open source project, we're going to maintain that license. So that's kind of number one. Number two, I think there's a great quote by one of the deputy directors of the NSA, Chris Inglis, who says that, if we scored cybersecurity the way we score soccer, the tally would be 462 to 456, 20 minutes in the game. It's all offense. And I think there's that asymmetry that's something that, through my career, I've always thought a lot about. Like, we as defenders, we have to be right all the time. And if you're an attacker, knock on all the doors, see which ones are easy to get in. And of course, do more targeted attacks. So whatever we could do to help the community share and contribute felt like something that was really important. And I don't know, I was at Palantir, I was doing some work for a bunch of financial companies. And, there was this concept, even then of like, we need to kind of work together. And the idea there was like, we're going to share IP addresses among the consortium of banks and these indicators of compromise, which, I think was a great, like, they did a lot of work to get this like legal framework in place, for this regulated financial industry. But as an engineer, I was always thinking like, okay, you're going to tell me that 8.8.8 or whatever is where your attack came from, or some Amazon ephemeral IP, like that's not really how it work. On the other hand, with things like Semgrep rules or, firewall rules, other things like that, I think we can share that is much harder for the attackers. They have to change their entire attack structure, right? Not just, get a new IP address. And so, we want to make it more and more expensive for attackers to have to, get the low-hanging fruit in our software. It still bothers me that the OWASP top 10 is largely still the OWASP top 10 of, 10 or 15 years ago. Like, we know how to fix SQL injection, right? Go use parameterized queries. And so we wanted to like contribute that back. And then also, of course, get the expertise. We knew we would never be able to hire the world expert in every single domain. And so if we could let people contribute that, it definitely helps our company. And, people can try out the product, like you said, they don't have to be an expert. And then kind of the last reason is more personal. For me, it was all about impact. And I knew that startups, 90% of them fail. And even today, Semgrep's not a guarantee. And so I didn't want to have all my 10 years of energy and life force going into something and then just shutting the whole company down and having that be gone. So at least I knew no matter what happened with Semgrep, at least the tool could live on, the community could have it, and not be impacted by work, would live on beyond the commercial company. Now, hopefully Semgrep has a bright future and we'll continue to invest and develop it, but some of the reasons that we focus on in the open source.
Yeah, no, I think a couple of things that you said made a lot of sense, right? So I think when we first started using Semgrep, we were looking to scale a bunch of Go code and PHP code. And I think you guys had great support for Golang, but not great support for PHP because it was very early on in the journey. But because there were community versions, because the rules were public, because there was probably a few other people who also wanted to use PHP, it was so easy to share knowledge, and we were starting writing rules ourselves, and there were others writing rules and so on and so forth, right? So that would have been very hard if it was not open source, because then you are completely reliant on Semgrep's roadmap. And I get a sense that PHP was not high on your roadmap priority, right? So and there was no other way to kind of use the entire framework well. So, I kind of see, where you're coming from. You kind of made like a reference to someone in the NSA, and I thought that was interesting because one of the things I kind of, when I was looking at your profile and saw what you did is that you kind of worked at the defense sector, first as a founder and then as well as at Palantir, and then you also kind of have worked in the civilian side of things, right? Um,
Yeah.
what has that taught you about cybersecurity? I mean, I'm not asking you for any of those. If I have to tell you, I have to kill
Yeah.
you type things,
Of course.
ignoring those things, right? But in general, I've never worked in kind of like in the defense sector. I've always been kind of on the commercial side. I mean, how different do people, who are in the defense sector look at cybersecurity? How is it different from civilian companies? And, are there ways where you can converge, or is it like whole different worlds?
Sure. Well, and just to be completely clear, I didn't do a ton of defense work. I did get a clearance, but it was mostly, Palantir had this cool forward deployed role where you're basically a consultant right out of school. I was helping out when companies got breached or hacked to fly to London, fly to New York, mostly on the commercial side. But some of my co-founders spent a lot more time in the Department of Defense. And so happy to share kind of what we've learned and kind of what I've observed. The first thing that comes to mind is that, the government is really fighting a cyber war against a whole host of adversaries, right? From the largest near peer kind of nation states all the way down to much less, well-funded adversaries. But, because of the asymmetry, like we have a lot more to lose because so much of our economy is online. And so the government, has to kind of think through the stakes of almost like this cyber warfare that's happening kind of covertly. And I think the civilian world is usually a lot different. I think, James Finkins has a great quote about there's sort of three threat models in security. Your girlfriend or somebody's trying to look through your phone. Get a good password. Okay, companies trying to steal your corporate data. Like, okay, great, run a good AppSec program, have modern hygiene. Okay, a nation state group like the Mossad or somebody's trying to come after you. It's like there is really no defense, right? Like they're going to get you. I'm not sure I'm quoting that correctly, but basically that's the gist, right? And so what I've seen a lot of civilian companies do is they're like, oh, we need this nation state level defense. We want to spend all this money. I like to think of it almost like trying to sell like a advanced, air defense missile system to a suburban homeowner. Meanwhile, you haven't locked your back door. And so I've seen a bunch of companies, banks, and others that have spent so much money on all these next generation AI, firewall, all this stuff. And it's like, actually, your problems are much more basic, right? You have a WordPress website that hasn't been patched in 3 years, and attackers can just come in without too much effort. And so our hope is that specifically on the civilian side, we get much better at building such a very short wall. Maybe it's a 1 foot wall all the way around the building. And then every year let you kind of level up and build more and more robust things. But you have complete coverage, right, of the way that you're actually being attacked versus being like, okay, we need to defend a nuclear power plant against Stuxnet. I mean, I don't know, right? Like there's just all kinds of crazy government type work that I don't think your average company is being targeted with, unless unless you're Lockheed Martin or something.
Yeah. No, I think the point you made on coverage is really interesting, right? So for the longest time, it was pretty common to say, hey, I'm not going to scan all the code I write because it's too expensive, it's too manual, it's too hard to do. And there is no more. I mean, and the idea was you pick the riskiest code you wrote, and how do you know that? Well, you know it, right? Somebody tells you, you have a criteria, you have an Excel sheet somewhere, and then only the riskiest code is what you scan, maybe once a month, once in 3 months, etc. Right? Kind of that paradigm is now out of the window, right? There's no question. You can now get 100% coverage on every piece of code you write, right? And I think that kind of a paradigm shift has made like a big difference in how people look at application security, right? And I think companies like Semgrep, and maybe Sneak and a few others too, who've kind of built the modern AppSec stack, have like a lot of credit to claim for that. Because until then, it was really, really hard to get high coverage. And now I feel like, 100% coverage is almost like a given, which was not the case just a few years ago.
It's super true. I mean, that's also why our strategy is maybe, even take our open source thing and just a single file is like, well, we're going to support as many languages as possible because we know that the modern stack is, an iPhone app, an Android app, web app, that. And then I think in the older generation of tools was primarily trying to defend against C++ or Java. But I also think the architecture of how we build products is different too. And so it used to be that you would have this, giant kind of binary that, you would could do data flow inside this, .bin file or whatever. And now, we have a bunch of microservices. You're calling Lambdas in AWS. You're probably calling OpenAI. You're calling all these different services. And so you kind of need to look holistically, not just at the single repository of code, but where is data flowing? Where are the security kind of choke points? Where are you going to write a rule to say like, okay, this is where we're going to have a guardrail that says user data doesn't go any deeper than this in our stack. And so again, I think just points to the importance of being able to write custom rules.
Yeah. Just one last question before I kind of hand it over to Anshuman, based on something you said, right? One of the interesting things I've kind of noticed in the last few years, is kind of the convergence of like static analysis, software composition analysis, and like secret scanning. I kind of feel like they were all the same thing like 10 years ago, and then they became like 3 different things. And now they're all coming back to kind of becoming the same thing. How do you kind of look at, just everything from security in code? Are they like 3 different activities which has to be done separately? Or is there kind of convergence on just saying, hey, write secure code or make sure your code is secure? I don't know if I'm framing this question right, but I guess essentially what I'm saying,
Totally. So we, at the technology level, think of it as all basically the same problem. And that's one of the things we do compared to some of our competitors, is it's the same engine for both first party, third party secrets. You launch other products. We'll continue to build on that because at the end of the day, it's all just code, right? You can think of infrastructure as code. Like the world is moving towards software-defined everything. And the user workflows are different, right? So you will probably have a compliance team, or somebody wants to, verify all the licenses of the third-party packages from legal. Like they're going to need a different view and workflow than, okay, I'm an engineer and I'm writing code. But I think a lot of the workflows, a lot of the integrations, a lot of the guardrails, IDE integrations, PR comments, all that really should be the same thing, because at the end of the day, you're producing high-load software that's getting shipped to production. Of course, you want the whole thing. Now, and there's some cool, clever technical tricks we can do, right? So, we can go scan React, for example, and know that everyone's using React, and we don't have to go re-perform all that expensive analysis. So there's some interesting techniques for sure. But the same underlying engine is used, at least on our side.
Yeah, so Drew, I want to spend some more time on this topic of open sourcing, right? Just because it's something that is very close to me as well. I've open sourced a bunch of tools in my career. I'm trying to see how you think about, cybersecurity companies especially when they're getting started, right, building the products out. How do you think about starting with an open source version first, and then basically driving the adoption by the community, and then seeing if there's, any potential viability of actually making it a commercial product or not? There are a few pretty, standard examples I've seen. HashiCorp is a great company I've seen where, they started with these open source tools, and then eventually they became who they are right now. Same thing with Project Discovery, right? The tool Nuclei is something I've seen born in front of me. I know the founders really well, and they also started with this idea of open sourcing this tool, which was very helpful for security researchers and AppSec engineers to find vulnerabilities, right? So if you take a step back and if you think about how Semgrep came about, you always know that you were going to make a commercial product out of it, or you just want to build something out there and see if it's actually providing value or not. How did you go about this whole process?
Yeah. So we knew we wanted to do a startup that would obviously be commercially viable, hopefully. So we always knew we wanted to have an enterprise component for it. But as I mentioned to start, like we had a lot of different ideas that people were like, it's kind of nice. But, in hindsight, it was like trying to start fire with wet wood. Like it felt like you do a ton of energy and time, and, you could maybe get a couple people excited. I remember one point with a previous product before we pivoted to Semgrep, it was like, can we get 256 users? We picked that number, obviously power of 2, but it was like bigger than the number of friends we couldn't just get our friends to use it. But also it was like achievable number, and we couldn't get it, so we pivoted to Semgrep. And I remember overnight it was like, we have 1,000 stars on GitHub. We didn't even have a README. People were contributing, and trying to get things to build and sending us questions. And filing bugs, and it was like, oh, this is what product market fit feels like. Maybe it's more like project community fit, but there was this real pull that was like dropping a match into a pool of gasoline that was like, oh, okay, now we're going to put all of our energy behind it. But for the first year, we didn't actually know how to commercialize it. And I remember Slack went to, I think it was Black Hat or something, and they gave this talk about how I think a couple interns and a full-time person had used Semgrep to build their AppSec thing. I remember one of their slides was like, oh, we haven't even paid Semgrep a penny. And I was like, okay, this now makes sense, right? We didn't want to do a bait and switch with the community and now, start charging for it. We also didn't want to go down more like a support model, like Red Hat or others might have done. But we're like, okay, if you need to build all the integrations, all the registration, all the login, all the SSO, all the stuff to actually run a commercially viable, endeavor, an AppSec team, like you're going to need to do that. And so great, you can either go have 2 or 3 engineers build that, more power to you, or you might just say, hey, wait, Semgrep has 60 engineers. They're going to continue to build this product. We want to just buy it. But I think going back to your kind of point about what advice for other startups, it's really like, can you get that pull? And I don't think you have to be open source. Of course, a bunch of security people want to look at things and poke at things. So being able to try it out for free without having to go to a sales pitch, I think is a great way to get awareness and adoption. If you are open source, you can go to a lot of meetups. I remember during COVID, I would go to 3 or 4 meetups every day and just talk about Semgrep, how to write rules. And that was a great way to kind of get user feedback. So I think the one downside or risk, and something we still trying to think about, almost every week we talk about, what's the risk of, we're totally fine if like consultants, even other AppSec companies want to use Semgrep. But we were worried about, the hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, whatever, wrapping it and being like, oh, we're going to build code security powered by X. Well, we're not going to compete on a budget against one of those large competitors. And I think the community realized that, right? You have things like Elasticsearch and you have HashiCorp, right? They've kind of changed their license to be like, hey, we're still going to be in the spirit of open, but we don't want other people to make money off of our hard work. And I think the community realizes that's pretty fair if you're going to have a viable startup ecosystem.
Yeah, I think HashiCorp changed their licensing pretty recently in 2024, if I'm not wrong, right? Yeah.
Yep.
That's
it's controversial and like, whatever. But I think the spirit is still there, which is like we're building really
absolutely
community.
So. Yeah, and I feel like, as security practitioners, especially for security engineers, application security engineers, when we evaluate, like I can speak from person, whenever I'm trying to evaluate a tool, right, which I want to see value in my day-to-day life, I would like to play with the POC first. I would like to see the documentation that is out there. And I think this is where, like Semgrep was just available out there. I could just install it. I could just run it on my code and I could just see the results out of the bat in like 5 minutes or so, right? So I think that really made me more comfortable exploring the enterprise options as well, right? So yeah, I think as security engineers, this is something that I really value is having tools out there with good documentation, with good API integrations with other vendors and whatnot. That basically allows us to evaluate tools in a more quantitative way, right? Where we can actually compare the inputs and the outputs. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Before we switch to discussing about AI and LLMs, Sandesh, is there anything else you want to cover?
No, let's go for it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So Drew, obviously with AI being the rage and trend these days, curious to know your thoughts about how you at Semgrep are thinking about leveraging AI and LLMs to help and alleviate some of the customers' concerns, right? Specifically when it comes to code security, what according to you are some areas that AI excels in and areas that still need some research before they could be implemented in security products like Semgrep? Just feel free to, it's an open-ended question.
Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. So we recognized pretty early that LLMs were going to be the future of security. I think it's still an open question to me. Is this in 3 months, a year, 5 years? But when GPT-3 came out, we had a small team that started working on it. And then now kind of as CTO, this has been my main focus for the last 6 months. Just really understand kind of at a fundamental level, like what is AI good for? There's a ton of hype, and the last thing I want to do is buy too much into that and kind of lose the community trust to But I think like you sort of phrased it well. We want to have generative AI plus Semgrep together build the next generation of SaaS companies. And so the way I kind of think about it, Gen 1, Fortify, the Covarities, whatever, they're going to just go through, find you some bugs. You can't really do anything, but, go for those vulnerabilities. You probably get thousands of false positives. Gen 2, us, Sneak, Code QL, things like that. You're going to write rules. You're going to customize it. You're going to have to learn how to do that. It's very expensive, but you're sort of doing that as well. And then Gen 3 is all about customization. The machine learns. It's almost like hiring 10, junior AppSec engineers on your team that can kind of watch and run things and go, oh, developers are ignoring this finding. Let me just automate editing the rule. They won't operate fully autonomously at first, right? They're gonna send it to you and say, hey, just like a junior member of your AppSec team, hey, here's what I think you should do. You should turn this rule off. It's actually low quality. You should edit it in this way. And so quite excited about this more agentic future of AI and getting the best of both the deterministic tool like Semgrep, that's actually understanding kind of the code structure, the data flow, the types of the variables, all the things that a compiler, under the hood is really able to do well, but then understanding the context and how we can fix things, which I think generative AI is super good at. So the three ways that we've been focused on using it, one is actually just prioritizing and triaging your findings, because as much as we'd love Semgrep to have 0 false positives, it still does. And every AppSec team is super busy. So if you have an hour, what should you do for that next hour? Let's use LLMs to go look at all the READMEs, go look at all the history of what your organization and developers have fixed, and we're kind of loading all that into the context, and then using that to sort of prioritize and score things so that we're always giving you the most signal and then asking you for feedback on, hey, did you get this thing right? So that's kind of the triage workflow. The next one is actually explaining to developers, what is a lot of these AppSec concepts. And so, for all of us on this call and probably a lot of our listeners, we know what SQL injection is. I'm not sure your average developer really understands this. And so if you can use the LLM, say, what is SQL injection? You can explain that. You can link to internal documentation and kind of customize it right in the pull request for the developers. And then you can even generate code. We know LLMs, like Claude 3.5, really good at generating fixes. Now, it may not be perfect, but at least it's 80% of the way there for the developer to say, oh, okay, I understand. Maybe indentation's wrong or something, but I understand why just concatenating strings and feeding it directly into the SQL driver is wrong. Here's what I should do instead. And so that's kind of the third case, and then the fourth, second case, and then the third case is more of that rule writing. And so when you get a false positive, can we suggest a change to the rule? Can you show us a couple examples? Something we haven't tried yet, but I would be excited to look at is, can you feed in pen tests, like the actual PDFs or something? Anthropic now supports reading PDFs and everything. Like, hey, let's grab that, summarize it. LLMs are great at summarization. Can we then try to generate a Semgrep rule with a decent message? Again, may not be perfect. I'm sure you still need to take some time as a human. But if we can automate that workflow there, I think it's just going to make it 10 times cheaper and simpler to write rules, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah. We should talk about the pentest, using pentest output to write Semgrep rules. I've actually played around with that, and actually it's surprisingly very good. But that's probably for another day. I wanted to double click on something you said, which was very interesting, right? In my opinion, one of the biggest problems with static analysis, or to an extent with dynamic analysis as well, but more with SAST, is that since the input is code and the code tells you what was built, but not always why it was built, right? So I kind of joke that sometimes SAST is kind of like, if you say, hey, what's going to happen if I walk out of the building? It says you can get a heat stroke, you can slip and fall, your car can hit you, a bus can hit you. It's just like a list of every possible thing that can go wrong, without kind of playing the probabilities of what can go wrong. It's not like, hey, it's sunny today, so maybe carry an umbrella. Like it's not that, but it's more like everything that can go wrong, right? And it's your job to turn off the right rules based on what you're doing. Do you think there's any possibility that, like SaaS tools, or well, maybe not SaaS tools, but just general the AppSec process can jump outside of code to understand, what kind of a company we are in, what kind of a product they're building, and then say, hey, here are the 7 things that are really important from a code perspective, right? Because until we get that, I kind of sometimes feel like it's really hard to kind of know beforehand what rules to turn on and turn off, right? So is that something kind of, okay, yeah.
Absolutely. So we're already doing a couple basic versions of this where we look for test code, we look for, we read the README, like, oh, okay, this is an intern project, et cetera. And so that contextualization, and you can even ask the LLMs, like, what technology is in this code? It'll tell you, oh, there's payment processing stuff here. And you could write a hard-coded rule for that, but that's a lot of effort and time to go and do all that. And so that's an area there. But then I think your point about how do you exist in the context of the company, this is where, Semgrep's all focused on build time security and, pre-build time, like source code, all that. There's a ton of runtime information, where things are deployed, is exposed to the internet, all that data. And so, on our roadmap is basically connecting all those sources, both in the interface for, humans to look at and, write rules that can select on context of like, is this deployed in production or not, but also for the LLM, through the graph database.
Yeah, and speaking of LLMs, I have a question about Semgrep Assistant. I don't think I've necessarily played with it, so I'm not fully aware of all the features, but I'm curious to know, like, how, like, if you can walk through us, your process of, what are some of the features you want to expose in Semgrep Assistant, because I think it uses LLMs behind the scenes, right? So how do you think about whether a feature would be beneficial for a customer versus something just trying to experiment with?
Yeah, so we have a team that's working on Semgrep Assistant, which is kind of our brand for generative AI work and anything that is really helping the busy AppSec engineer. We do a ton of research and development, and I Python notebooks and have our security teams label things. So there's a lot of work there, but then there's also a bunch of product integrations, and we're really thinking about kind of where the developer looks at the Semgrep findings, which is mostly in the PR comments, things like that. So what's the workflow to get security teams to feel trust and the confidence to say, hey, this is like a spam filter now. If the assistant doesn't think this thing is high quality, let's not waste the developer's time by showing it. We'll suppress that noise. You can still look through and give us feedback, and we want that feedback so the models can get better and smarter. But let's make sure that it's friendly and simple to use, it's understandable for the developer. So everything from contextualization, from rule writing, from prioritization, from the fix and the remediation side, all anchored with, of course, Semgrep itself as the deterministic engine, because we hear from a lot of customers that they're worried about hallucinations or the LLMs being wrong. And so it's like, no, actually, you're still getting the Semgrep rule, you're still getting the engine that's happening. So that's how we've been thinking about Semgrep Assistant. It's early days. We've been kind of working on this for the last year, but we're seeing tremendous progress. And of course, every week it seems like there's a new foundation model that gets released. And so I'm excited to see kind of where that goes, especially some of the new reasoning models and some tool use that we're doing.
Yeah, I remember reading a blog, I think sometime this week, about the difference between an assistant and an agent, right? So how are you thinking about Semgrep Assistant? Like, do you foresee the assistant converting into an agent when in the agentic world, or do you feel like assistant is probably the the most extent you or companies should be experimenting with when it comes to code security, and with this idea of augmenting humans as opposed to replacing them completely? Any thoughts about this, agent versus assistant?
So I think the world will definitely go to the agentic world, and we're building towards that. But I don't foresee us replacing humans. I think when people talk a lot about artificial superintelligence and all this, sometimes I think about, okay, maybe in 5 years, all of Semgrep is completely useless. We have an LLM that is so much smarter than all of us. It just writes perfect code. There's no security bugs. We're all out of the job. Maybe. I even today, though, I'm like, nah, I think if that was true, we'd be having the LLMs just generate machine code rather than software. We still need to have humans that understand things, have knowledge, have checks to get feedback and kind of train these models. And so I think to the extent that we're agentic, I don't think this is like, oh, just go and fix things for you. It's going to be, again, kind of that junior AppSec engineer model of, okay, you gave me a high-level prompt, which is get rid of SQL injection in the code base. I went and wrote a bunch of Semgrep rules, found a bunch of things, started to propose some fixes. I bring it to you now, the experienced person on the team, to say, good job. let's send that to the developer so that they can kind of merge that in, or nope, actually we need to try again, right? Or manually edit these rules. And so I think even in that agentic behavior, it's still going to be very complementary between the humans, and we just don't have enough time, right? Even the best funded security teams at Google or whatever, there's like one security engineer for every 100 developers. And so you either have to convince all 100 to write perfect code, or you're busy AppSec engineer. So a long way of saying I don't think the agents will replace the humans.
Yeah, I think the reference I like the most is kind of like with using AI. It's kind of like a car which goes really, really fast from 0 to 60, and then like 3 seconds for 0 to 60, 3 minutes for 60 to 80, and beyond 80, well, who the hell knows if it can even go there, right? So it's kind of like it can get you up and running very quickly and get you somewhere very quickly, but beyond that, you still need humans to kind of help it go along and kind of do things better. So agree with you on that. Yeah.
It's an exciting space for sure. And I think, like we have a ton of automation in airplanes today, right? I mean, we all fly. We don't even think about the fact that 95% of the time, the pilots are just kind of monitoring and observing. And if something goes wrong, they're ready to jump in. Hopefully we don't get rid of pilots for a long time. So I think the same thing will be true in security.
Okay. Cool. All right. Anshuman, did you have anything else for Drew?
No, I think I'm good.
I think we're at the top of 45 minutes as well. So Drew, thank you so much for joining us. This was great. We had a lot of fun, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
thanks so much, guys, for having me. I really appreciate the conversation, and thanks again for all the feedback about Semgrep.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Jubba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.